Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be putting back on our on-chain analysis hat and be discussing the transaction fees. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We, of course, do have a lot of different on-chain data. We don't talk about it all the time on this channel or that frequently, but it is somewhat useful to look at, and we have, of course, for a lot of different cryptocurrencies, and it depends on the metric that you're looking at. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time here talking about transaction fees for Bitcoin, something we've actually talked about a number of times on the channel. And one of the reasons I like it is because it actually is somewhat helpful in identifying a bull market and a mania phase. Also, it's helpful in determining, relatively boring times in the market, right? You don't need to look at too many things, but the transaction fees to know kind of whether Bitcoin is in some manic bull run or if it's just sort of in this humdrum phase where no one really cares anymore. If you look over here in 2017, you'll see that we really geared up into this bull run, right, where the price action was just going absolutely crazy. And so too were the transaction fees for Bitcoin going into this sort of crazy blow off top, not only for the price, but also for the transaction fees. And you'll note that transaction fees sort of peaked only about 5 or 6 days after the actual price of Bitcoin peaked. So not too shabby for something as simple as following the transaction fees for Bitcoin. And then additionally, if you look at 2021, you'll also see a major spike just again a few days, 5 or 6 days after the peak for Bitcoin. Now, you might argue, well, 69K was technically the peak, and technically you are correct, and price action is king. Of course, there's plenty of indicators, as always, that will still they'll always suggest that 64K was a more a more technical top. Although, for anyone who just says price action is king, it's hard to discount the 69K price when we got there in November. So, but again, I mean, just in terms of following these mania phases, if you look at this mania phase over here, the peak was actually fairly well captured simply by just looking at the transaction fees. And, this is what made the last cycle so difficult was this first run up right here was a lot easier to sell into. And we talked about, right, we're going to have a summer lull, and prices are going to go down for a while. And again, these are the sort of the bubbles that you live for, and you wait for it to happen, because whenever they happen and you see the price skyrocket in a relatively short period of time, it's much easier to sell into that as a long-term investor. I think it becomes a lot more harder when it's only like a 2x move back up to where it already came from. And if you look at some of the other on-chain analysis, such as like the HODL ratios and some of the other stuff, they also suggest that most long-term holders were more interested in this first peak rather than the second one. I think part of it could also just simply be that people who sold at this first peak were less likely to sell at the second one because they already sold, their Bitcoin, right? At least the ones that were long-term holders. If you're a long-term holder and you sold the Bitcoin you had been holding for a long time, of course it's going to take years to sort of get back into some of those like 2-year HODLs and that sort of stuff. But peak here in 2017, again another peak here in 2021. But you also know that 2018 through most of 2020, not all of it, was relatively humdrum in terms of price action. Now, when you look at it, yes, there were some nice moves. And this even goes back to today, where we have the bulls and the bears bickering as to, what exactly, what price Bitcoin's going to go to. Is it going to go up a few $1,000s? Is it going to go down a few $1,000s? But what you're really looking for, you're really living for in terms of the cryptoverse is these major bull runs that go up, 20, 30x, not just like a 2x move to the upside followed by another 50% drop. So there's a big difference between sort of these phases of the cryptoverse. And again, from 2018 through most of 2020, it was relatively dull. There was a very brief period, like just like a few months, like maybe a 4-month window where transaction fees actually went up quite a bit, and and you can argue there's sort of like a mini bull run. But if you look at where we are today, it hasn't really gone anywhere in a sustained way just yet. Doesn't mean it can't. It's just that, when and actually recently you can of course see that transaction fees have been moving up very, very slightly, but still a long way to go for, to call it a sustained bull market. I mean, I do see a lot of people calling it that. And, there's also a difference, of course, between, lows and also getting into a sustained bull market to take you to new all-time highs. I mean, even in 2018, once the lows were in, again, price was relatively flat for quite a long period of time before you got into that sustained bull market to new all-time highs. Perhaps we can add a moving average to this as well, maybe like a 7-day SMA. If you look at it like this, you can see the transaction fees have been going up somewhat recently, not as high as they were back over here in November, although arguably this was for worse reasons than what we're seeing now. This was probably going up quite quickly because people were sort of flocking to the exits, and as the price was going down rather than the price going up. But again, I think these on-chain indicators are useful to look at and sort of remind ourselves where we are within the cycle, and to just be sort of mentally prepared for for the coming year, and sort of just be patient and recognize that it takes a long time to build into these crazy mania phases that lead you to new all-time highs. So just remember that. I do find just sort of being mentally prepared for the most likely scenario is always useful in navigating the cryptoverse. It's just not to say that it can't turn into anything more. I mean, you'll see again what happened in 2019 was fairly impressive. I mean, it was a 4x. It was almost a 4x move. But again, still a ways off, in my opinion, of putting in new all-time highs. Normally, after a major bear market year like 2014, 2018, and 2022, you get a recovery year where you spend a bit of time chopping sideways for a while, and you sort of wipe out both sides. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, remember we do have Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.